Do mighty deeds. Love that line. A little line from the Hygromantia describing one of the qualities of one of the hours of Mars. What do you do during that hour? Do mighty deeds. Sounds very impressive and intense. Probably a lot of us would like to do mighty deeds, and yet in order to do mighty deeds, you first have to learn how to do deeds at all. How do you take action? And so this is related to that. This whole game is about that. And today's video is brought to you by, well, not sponsored by, it's inspired by Getting Things Done by David Allen, a 2001 book that set a whole bunch of people on personal productivity obsessions for some years to come. I didn't read it till about 2008, and it was perfect because it was just what I needed to help get some of the legs under this game that was just beginning to form at the time. And so Getting Things Done is a system for getting unfinished tasks, what David calls open loops, and I've stolen that term, for getting open loops out of your head and into the world, into a system that you trust. So you don't have to carry them around in your head thinking about them all the time. And you also don't have to worry about whether that system is going to let anything fall through the cracks. So there are three main takeaways for this, the first of which I'm going to share. I say three main takeaways for what we're doing. There's a lot to learn from it. So the first of these is minimize your inboxes. If I had to ask you, how are things going in your life and what are all of the unfinished tasks that you have, how quickly could you answer that question? How do you know that some task isn't going to come creeping out at you that you forgot about, that you brushed under the rug or something like that, that fell through the cracks? Do you know for sure what all of your stuff is? I know when I started this, I definitely didn't. I needed to minimize my inboxes. And so what that means is having one inbox that at least accounts for everything that's going on. And that's not to say that you can't have other inboxes for doing the daily stuff, but all that stuff has to be or should be represented in one inbox, or at least minimize your inboxes. You can probably get it down to one now. And the plus side of that is that anytime you're feeling stressed or whatever, you can actually look at what needs to be done and then find out what's actionable and what you can do about it. Which brings us to point two. What is actionable? What is actionable? So some things are going to look actionable, but they will not be. We're going to get to that in a second. Let's start with the easy stuff. Roll the dice. Eat your lunch. Park the car. They're all perfectly actionable. Now, none of those things are likely to be on a list, but I'm just showing you immediately things you can just do. They don't involve planning. If the lunch is already made, you simply eat it. If the dice are there, you simply roll them. You got the idea. Calling a person, sending a text message or an email, those are tasks. Those are actions. What about setting up a business? That, I would insist, probably falls under the next category of what we call projects. And projects are not actionable. Projects need to be broken down into tasks which are actionable. Sometimes something's not actionable because you're waiting on something. You want to build a house, but you're waiting on the materials to be able to do the foundation. Building the house is not something you can take action on at that point. You have to sort out some kind of an issue with the IRS, and you're waiting for a returned phone call or fax or carrier pigeon. That's not actionable. There's nothing you can do about that. At least not in that particular, contact your congressperson. There, that's your next action. Sometimes you have to change strategies, okay, because an action isn't working. But that action of take next IRS action step, not actionable. Not yet. When it comes to something that's not actionable because it's a project, that brings us into category 3. So let's go with the example of, let's get out of business for a second. Let's talk about planning a wedding. So go to the wedding is actionable, but planning a wedding is a project. In fact, for a lot of people, it is a massive project with little projects inside of it. You might be reminded of how finite games can nest in infinite games. Well, they can nest in other finite games too. Projects are related. We'll see how. If you have to get quotes for a dress and a cake and a venue and a menu and you've got all these options. Okay, well, the dress becomes a project and the venue becomes a project because you've got all these multiple steps. First, you got to find vendors, then you have to contact them and get quotes, and then you have to look at the quotes, then you need to freak out about it, and then you need to pick one. You get the idea. That's a project. When people get stuck in procrastination, fake statistic, 80% of the time, it's for one of these two reasons. One, they don't know what the next step is, so they assume it's going to be horrible, and they just hallucinate an awful experience and they don't go near it. Probably without a whole lot of specifics, to tell you the truth. They just assume that it's this big thing. They take the weight of the entire project on them oftentimes. Then you've got the other thing, which is it's not actionable, that you can't proceed because they've taken an entire project and called that the next action. And that's intimidating. So let's move on to projects so we can wrap up this open conversational loop and put all this stuff to bed so you all can get on to whatever's next in your day. So here we go. Projects involve multiple steps. And to the extent that you can internalize things, projects are simpler. Making a cake for one person is a project. For other person, it's an action. Driving to New York City for one person is a project. For another person, it's an action. And it probably has something to do with how many times you've done that thing. If there's somebody that always drives from Atlanta to New York City, they know how to do it. They don't have to think about it. You've all most likely experienced being on what people might call autopilot or being in road hypnosis, where you just kind of space out in the middle of your drive and then you kind of click back in somewhere later. Everything's okay, but what the heck? Where were you? Well, because you've internalized it. So those things are going to make a difference. Making things habits, you will find, will be very highly rewarding, and I'll show you the best ways to do it. Also, having keystone habits that wind up taking care of a lot of other stuff in advance, those things will be useful, and you're going to learn how to do those too. But in the meantime, I want you to realize if you find yourself in a situation that you're procrastinating, there's a fake statistic, 80% likelihood you're in one of those two things, that you either don't know the next step and so you are avoiding it out of fear that it might be horrible, or you've taken something that's actually a multi-step process and made that into the next step and it seems bigger than it is. You might be reminded of the story of the people building a cathedral. And that if you were to ask one person on the site, what are they doing? They'd say, I'm mixing mortar, or I'm laying bricks, or I'm whatever. And at the other extreme, you're going to find somebody that says, I'm building a cathedral. This is often put out there in terms of, well, how do you inspire yourself? If you feel like you're just stuck stacking bricks, maybe you need to think about the bigger picture. What's more exciting? What's the larger category? The bigger, as they would say in NLP and hypnosis in my world, chunk size, category size, I would prefer. And, how big is that? So are you picking up litter out of sight? Are you saving the planet? And there's a big spectrum that things can be on. So when it comes to your goals, they're going to fall on a similar spectrum. And if you find yourself intimidated and scared about your goal, step it back a bit. If you find yourself bored by it, notch it up a bit. There's a spectrum you can find yourself on. If there's a goal of paying off a $40,000 debt, there's one place where that goal seems huge. Oh yeah, just pay the 40 grand. Oh, great, because I had just 40 grand to throw right at that real quick. At the other extreme, it's, paying them $1 at a time, writing down the serial number of every bill that comes through, or every check number, or other antiquated means of paying off small increments of. You get the idea. You can bug yourself out with that because it seems like it's never going to happen. It's the same way with weight loss. It's the same way with starting a business. It's the same way with any big goal can be broken down into smaller goals. Smaller goals can fit into larger categories that can make them more inspiring. We'll talk more about that stuff. Consider it just a bonus to today's video, or an unwanted tangent, depending on how it landed for you. And we will talk about this stuff more in the future. Those are the 3 big points I wanted to share from GTD. They click right into the game, and you'll see how as we continue to get into these. The next video will probably be on the topic of 43 folders, unless there's something that I've forgotten. 43 folders is going to show you how the game calendar works. And it took a really long time, actually, for this to enter into the game, and it made such a huge difference. So I hope to see you in the next video. Wishing you all the best in this crazy world. Go out there and use the magic. Seeing you.